highly recommended to me as a leadership lesson speaker by a member of the executive committee. So I'm very pleased that Jennifer was able to join us today. She joined AHIP, and I'm sure she'll talk about what AHIP, the mission of AHIP, if y'all aren't familiar with AHIP, Albemarle Housing Improvement Program. She joined AHIP in April 2006 as Director of Resource Development. And in 2009, she became Executive Director. Jennifer has more than 20 years of experience in fundraising, communications, and membership, having worked for a variety of nonprofit arts, social services, housing rights, and public interest organizations in Washington, D.C., New York City, and the San Francisco Bay Area, all wonderful places to live. Prior to joining AHIP, Jennifer served as Development Director for the National Housing Law Project. Why is my phone making noise? National Housing Rights Organization based in San Francisco. Jennifer grew up in Maryland and earned a Bachelor of Arts degree in communication from James Madison University, and she lives here in Albemarle County. So without further ado, let's turn it over to Jennifer. If we all could mute ourselves, that would be great, so we don't inadvertently interrupt her presentation.
Good morning. Hi, everybody. Thank you. Thank you so much for the introduction and the invitation. I see Boonmi Collins here. I owe you an email. I'm so sorry. I have not forgotten about you. I didn't actually ever say in my notes that I have what AHIP does, so I'll just let you know what AHIP does. We are a home repair nonprofit. We believe that everyone should be safe at home. And we do critical home repairs and housing rehabs and energy upgrades for households in Charlottesville and Albemarle. And we got our start as a volunteer effort after Hurricane Camille in 1969, and then became incorporated and started work in earnest in 1976. So we're a little over 4 decades old and going strong. So last spring, AHIP emerged from a profound organizational crisis. It was the result of this perfect storm of circumstances, and I could spend like a half day really going into the nitty-gritty of what all happened there. But basically, just like the long and short of it was that it was set off by a crippling and sudden funding cut, and some other disappearances of fundings, but there was a big one that really set it off. It was complicated by funding streams not adequately covering our costs, our true costs of delivering our service, rising costs, and years of steady growth and success. I would say pretty like hot growth and success that had masked the fact that we weren't covering our costs. So it sort of hid that from us. We weren't really looking at what we should have been looking at, and we didn't realize we were getting behind. So all of that happened at the same time. Another factor was grit, which I know we talk about a lot now as a really good thing, and it is, but there is a dark side of grittiness, because when you put your head down and just make it work, and that becomes your strategy, you run the risk into drifting into what we in the nonprofit world, maybe elsewhere, call magical thinking. So grit should accompany your strategy, but it shouldn't be your strategy. Because when it is, it can end in a catastrophic cash flow crisis, which is where we found ourselves at AHIP in mid-December 2018. It was awful and slow moving. It was like a weather system that just sits over top of you and soaks you. It prolonged the pain. It was full of uncertainty and fear and confusion, all the things that are really bad for humans, and things that make for conditions that are just not suitable for work. So as a leader, what did I do? So how did I expertly shepherd my organization through this crisis? All right, you ready? Here's what I did. I cried a lot, especially in the beginning when it was freshly terrifying and bewildering. I had no idea what to do. It was nearly impossible to talk about the situation and not begin to weep. And you know when you're trying to talk to somebody and the corners of your mouth start to pull down? You know that feeling, and you know the person you're talking to can see it because you see their eyes looking at your mouth, and you're reduced to a 7-year-old again, right? And you're trying to maintain control, and you're trying to look competent, and you just can't. I feel like openly sobbing would almost be better in that situation. Also, weeping while talking or getting ready to weep while talking is not a super great reinforcer of one's own confidence. So it creates its own feedback loop that you're out of control and you're out of your depth. So I cried. What else? I beat myself up. For me, there was a lot of ego bruising around this. Like I had personally failed to prevent this, to stop it, to come up with some snappy magic solution, or even a coherent plan in the beginning, honestly. I don't know how many of you are in nonprofits or have been in nonprofits before. I don't know what the share of for to nonprofit in this group is, but if you're not, you should know that nonprofits on a good day are very grueling. It's hard no matter what the situation. So nonprofit in an overwhelming crisis is just kind of inhumane. So the self-beatings were impressive. They were like an art form, and I mastered that one. So what else? I spent a lot of time sort of paralyzed at my desk. So my whole being was clenched, trying to figure it out on my own with my door closed. So, you know, when your therapist asks you, or like, I'll just speak for myself. My therapist used to ask me, I'd be like explaining something, and she would say in her beautiful, soothing voice, she'd interrupt me and she'd be like, where do you feel that in your body? And has anybody ever gotten that question before? You have to stop and think about what it feels like. Well, here's where I felt it. I felt it in my breastbone, behind it, like top of my rib cage. It felt like I was going to implode in those moments. Like a million pieces. You know, when you see the videos of when they detonate when they blow up the buildings to destroy them, to raise them, right? And it's sort of like there's just puff of smoke at the top, and then the whole thing just kind of crumbles down onto itself. That's what I felt in my body. So I think you can probably picture that. Maybe you felt that feeling before. So I just sort of sit there. I would clench in place, and as you can probably guess, I never figured anything out while doing that. Not one single time did anything ever come to me while I was hunched over my desk trying to figure it out on my own. The other thing that I did was I tried to protect my staff from all of the bad news at first, which was really cute when we had to lay off 5 people in June of 2019, which was just before the start of our FY20 fiscal year. So we're on a July to June fiscal year. We had to lay off 5 people and no one saw it coming. Not the guy we had just hired 2 weeks before, not the guy who had hired the guy 2 weeks before, who had essentially hired him under false pretenses. Even though some of us had known what was going on, most of them did not. And it felt like an ambush, and it was an ambush. And I realized that I hadn't protected anyone from anything. I had just covered it up, however well-intended. I covered it up, I had diverted it, and I had made it so much worse. So are you all totally riveted and dazzled by my exceptional leadership skills?
We are riveted, Jennifer.
Kathy's probably
riveted.
Like, oh my God.
We're riveted. I'm writing everything down.
I was gonna say, you're probably like, I should have vetted this one more. I should have.
No, I didn't want to interrupt you, Jennifer. And I'm not going to interrupt you again. I'm so in awe of your vulnerability and courage at this moment. So please continue.
I should just end there. I should be like, and thank you. So I'll tell you, I'll keep going. I'll tell you what happened. So here's how it played out. I continued to cry and blame myself a lot. I mean, that's just, I'm good at that. It didn't go away until things really started to turn around and stabilize, cash flow improved, light into the end of the tunnel and all that. There was also an awesomely timed crisis in my personal life that overlapped with the AHIP crisis. And that's awesome when that happens. And that also loosened its grip on me, and I steadied in that way too. So slowly things got better and I wept a lot less. The second thing is I learned with that terribly painful lesson when I had to sit in a room full of all of the staff and actually like come clean with what was happening. And I also learned from advisors who knew better than I did and gave me really good advice. And that's probably the best advice I got throughout this entire entire thing, that withholding information for their own good or to protect my own ego, because I didn't want somebody to be like, what the hell were you doing all this time? And why didn't you prevent this? Or so they wouldn't leave, because I was afraid that there would be this exodus, right? And then AHIP would really be in trouble. I realized that that was the wrong thing to do. And so I promised everyone at that meeting that I would answer every question that anybody asked of me. If I knew the answer, that I would answer it. And also that I would proactively update them, which required some discipline because I was so steeped in it day to day, hour to hour, minute to minute, that I forgot that other people weren't and that they didn't know as much as I did. So it took some practice and some discipline to remember to update them, only because I sort of just thought that everybody knew what I knew. So much better policy. I think that builds trust. I mean, of course it does, right? Like if people think your policy is to lie to them, then they're not going to trust you, and they're going to fill in the gaps on their own. There's also a point to be made about being honest and vulnerable, to use Kathy's word, with our stakeholders too. So in nonprofits, we spend a lot of time waving the pom-poms and smiling through the pain, right? Pretending it's all fine. So we don't want to scare anyone off. We don't want anybody to stop donating. And so there's a lot of posing that happens. And I still pose some, and I still do. And, you know, or I filed the edges down and make it a little less dramatic. And sometimes that's appropriate, right? You can't tell everybody everything all the time. But I tried to be very disciplined about sharing what was going on with the people who had a stake in AHIP. And also try to turn the people who I was worried might abandon me into allies and counselors, because I needed the help, right? And for the most part, it worked. And anyway, I think I'm a good liar, but I'm a terrible liar, so it wouldn't have worked if I had tried. Plus, it's hard to convincingly say things when you're about to cry, right? So you kind of have to share what's going on. And then I also realized that being paralyzed at my desk wasn't good, which might be obvious, but it took some time. So I got much better at interrupting that impulse, that pattern, and reaching out when I needed to talk something through, even if it was just to like bellow, right? Like I needed to like diffuse that tension. So we talk and hear all the time about seeking, giving support. And I know you know that that's important. It was crucial for me. It stopped the imploding. It unparalyzed me and kept me going. I was really lucky, and still am, to have an extensive network of very smart and caring people. And this is colleagues within my organization, board members, friends, loved ones, who can give me excellent counsel and can also give me love. And I think that this is one of the myths of leadership. So, you know, like the lone leader who intuitively knows what to do, like standing on the prow of the ship with the big, like the steering wheel, right? Looking out, like steering alone. And these are the ones we write books about, you know, like how they saved Chrysler or GE and or whatever, you know, like the jacket photo of the guy, it's usually a dude, like staring off into the middle distance, thinking leadership-y things, magical things. So we love those stories because they're comforting and they're tidy. And when you look back, there's a narrative and it's organized and it provides like order, but they're incomplete. The stories are incomplete. They're misleading. And the reality is a lot messier and a lot less linear than that. And it's also a lot more crowded because it's never just the one guy. So we ascribe a lot to leadership, and I'll put that in quotes, like leadership is like a concept. Like it's like a thing, we make it into a thing. It's like weather, it's like gravity, it's like a magical kind of mystical force. And I feel like we oversimplify it. Like, you know, like here are the 7 things good leaders do. I'm sure you've seen like a ton of those things come through the inbox. And we simultaneously complexify it. So we make it this overwhelming, magical, and kind of inscrutable force that you just have a good leadership, or you don't. And so in my experience, it's like, it's neither. I mean, the little pithy tips can be helpful because like, and usually it's just common sense that you just need to be reminded about. So those are good, it's not wasted. But I think that good leadership, and this was hard, like trying to put this together was hard because I was trying to not slide into like platitudes about self-care, you know, all the things that we hear about and talk about. But I think good leadership or one aspect of it, because there's multitudes, right? There's so many things to it. One aspect of it that was important for me during this crisis was genuinely valuing the people who we work with and creating the conditions where everybody can thrive and feel good and feel loved and do well. It's also valuing the people who come to us for services or buy our products. If you're for profit and you sell things, or the people that we impact in the community directly, individuals or collectively, in terms of our footprint and how we bump into our community in various ways. It's listening intently, it's paying attention, like really paying attention, and being honest and acting in good faith, like just staying there. It's a lot like being a parent or a partner, and that there's no guaranteed critical path to success, right? There's no one way, if you do it, then you're going to get this result. There's a lot of screwing up and trying again. It's a lot of just being present, like meaningfully present, but just there and not leaving. And sometimes the most exceptional leader in the world, the guy on the prow of the ship, right, can't figure it out. It doesn't work. And sometimes really crappy leaders have a lot of success. So there's a lot of luck involved too. Fortunately or unfortunately, I don't know if that's a good or a bad thing. And there are always more people involved than just the one doing the leadership or taking credit for it. So to tell you how the story ends, how everything hasn't, the end of this chapter, let's just say, is we made it through. We started the FY20 fiscal year on July 1 of last year. July 1 of 2019, that budget year, with an enormous projected budgeted deficit. And I don't even like to say the number still, but in the interest of continuing to be vulnerable, I will tell you that it was $609,000 was our projected budgeted deficit for a budget of like 3.2 million. It's a gigantic percentage. Just unsustainable, right? We were supposed to run out of money in December was our initial projection. Terrifying. And then we ended the fiscal year last June with a surplus. And we did that by working and analyzing and trimming, and the staff had to subsidize that by doing 2 jobs, sometimes 3 jobs. We got smarter about a lot of things. We paid attention. We had fundraising and financial staff that just killed it. They killed it. They did so well. We had donors who continued to invest. They did not abandon us. Financially, right now, we are the healthiest and most stable we have ever been in our 44 years. We have an excellent staff. We have an excellent board. My poor board chair, who was the board chair for the 2 years of the crisis, I feel so bad for her, but excellent board. And we are not taking for granted any of this. We're continuing to do the work of improving and fortifying this, trying to adapt to make sure that this doesn't happen again. We are also not taking this for granted because we are still rather tender from this. It was bruising and we all still feel it. The stress on the staff was torture, and I am aware of that, and I don't take it lightly. We did lose some people. We lost 3. And so all of this did not come without a cost. But here's the thing that I'm most proud of. In the thick of FY20, which ended last July, when we were digging ourselves out of our fiscal crisis, not knowing if we'd make it or not. And then we ran right into the pandemic, which was also awesome because it's always great to have 1, 2, or 3, crises at the same time. What I'm most proud of is that through all of that terrible stuff, AHIP helped 282 people in 104 households with critical home repairs and rehabs and upgrades. So we didn't stop and try to figure, we had to keep going. There was still work to be done. The phone still rang. We had to be busy, and we did it. And we had a really good, if we look at the map, we had a really good year. Everyone put their heads down. No one stopped working, staff, board. That was when the grit came in, right? It helped propel us along. So I don't take the credit for that, because I didn't do that or make that happen. But if I had anything to do with it, it was by not screwing it up, because of creating conditions that help people to continue to do their job, to stay present, and also to regroup when I did screw up, because I screwed up plenty. And if that worked and that it worked, I will take that as a win. That's my story.
Yay! Yay! Thank you, Jennifer. I just invited folks to ask you questions in the chat. So if they have a question, they can type, or we might just get someone to chime in. Thank you so much. You said a couple of things as people are thinking about. I'll get to questions. I see questions coming in. As giving people time to put questions in the chat. A couple of things you said really struck at me, and I do mean it sincerely. Thank you for your vulnerability. That's amazing. And your transparency. Two things you said that really important is what you described as sort of the lone man, the super person. That's called the great man theory of leadership, and it's been debunked. It's not, but it's an old, very masculine model of leadership that we still all have in our heads. We all carry around that model sort of image in our head of this great man who's going to come in and rescue all of us, which it doesn't work that way. So good for you for noticing that. And if we don't, I see questions. If we don't have more questions, I'll get you to talk about the role of allies. I think, because I'm always amazed by people. You use the word grit, I'd use the word resilience. And it's an area of study that I'm particularly interested in, because I struggle feeling like that I don't feel like I'm as resilient as I'd like to be. And so I study people and study the research about resilience. And so I'd love for you to talk about that. Those two things about how have you built your resilience through all of this, how you didn't give up, and then the role of allies that sort of kept you going. Julia has a question about how many staff do you have now?
Right now we have 18 staff. At our heyday before the first round of layoffs, we had 25 or 26. There were some half-time employees in there, and then there was another sort of division that is no longer there. But yeah, we're right around 18.
Okay. Does anybody have questions? So, because yes, Andrea, her hand is up.
Jennifer, thank you. That was pretty powerful. And I just want to ask a question about, when you were speaking about the corners of your mouth turning down, and you felt the cry coming. And I admit I'm a crier, and I had to get over the point that it showed a form of weakness.
Yeah.
At what point did you get to that point where it was like, because you said you did a lot of crying, that you realized it was okay to emote this way?
Well, I will say that I still didn't like crying in front of the foundation guy,
I know.
So there are some instances where I wasn't okay with it, and I probably still wouldn't be. So there's still a little bit of self-conscious, but
Was that because he's a man, or just
no,
who he
just
represented?
the position and the
Yeah.
the power dynamic, and trying to look like you're competent, right? Like there is a sense of like, oh my God. But elsewhere, I think I just got more comfortable with it, and partly it was people reassuring me that, like, well, that's a genuine emotion to have, and it's okay to show that, because, like, honestly, you'd be a sociopath if what happened at AHIP didn't upset you, right? I mean, I think it might be alarming if I was sort of steely and unmoved by what was going on. But I did want to get to the point where I could actually have a conversation without buckling into tears, right? Like there's, yeah. So I think, I don't usually have trouble expressing how I feel about things. Like, I think I'm okay in that department. But it is hard, just like what I said about like trying to pose a certain way so that people will continue to support you, because it's not just me. If it was me in my personal crisis, that's one thing, but I'm trying to represent the organization and be responsible and try to do the right thing and continue to attract. And there is a lot of that sort of conditioning. I've been in nonprofits for a really long time. There's a lot of that conditioning where it's sort of like reflexive. You pretend that everything's fine. I mean, there's a study that shows that like 90% of the human services organizations in New York, this is a brilliant study, are like on the edge of like financial insolvency. All of them, almost all of them, but nobody talks about it, right? And so I think there is value in being honest if if for nothing else, to give other people permission to be honest about it, so that, and this is sort of a different topic, but so we can be a little more honest with funders and donors about funds that actually cover costs, so we're not all starved to death and on the brink of financial ruin. I think there's a real structural issue here with how nonprofits are funded, which again, different talk. But so anyway, that's sort of how that, like, that spectrum goes. When you're vulnerable and honest, you can help teach the people that need to know, instead of pretending like everything is fine as it is.
Yeah. Thank you for that.
Anybody else? Anybody else want to ask Jennifer a question? All right, because it's already 1:30 and I want to be respectful of people's time, but I do want her to talk, if she doesn't mind, the two things that I mentioned: resilience. How did she build her resilience, stay resilient, not give up, and the role of allies. I think those were two really critical things that she talked about that we all can learn from. So I'll let her answer those, and then we'll wrap up the meeting.
Okay, sure. So I'll do the resilience one first. I will say that I wanted to give up. Like, I really did. I mean, there were many times where I wanted to run screaming from that. It just seemed, it seemed impossible. Actually, absolutely impossible. Like, it was a terrible math problem and there was no answer. And I think the thing that kept me there was my commitment and my responsibility to the organization. Like, I wanted to go many times, but there was no way I would have left. And somebody actually did, one of my allies did say, well, like, everybody has their limits. If you want to go, you should go. And I was like, I can't go. Like, there were all these people, right? Like, there were the people in my organization that I felt a responsibility to. And then there were all the people who call us for help. Like, people's heaters fail and their roofs start to cave in. And there is no way that I could, in good faith, be like, well, we did our best. And that might have been the end, right? That might have sunk the organization. Like, it could not have worked. But I wasn't going to prematurely do that and stop working as hard as I could to make sure that that didn't happen. And we had several opportunities where we could have pared the staff back dramatically. And we just, like, held that off and straight armed that for as long as we could. And due to luck and circumstance and just hard work by the staff and the board, like, we managed to get through it, and we didn't, and I'm glad we didn't do that. But I think that it was just a product of that presence that I was talking about, and the commitment. I don't know if that's fancy enough, but like, it's like there was just no way that I could have left at that point. But that's not to say that I didn't want to. Like, I just wanted it to stop several times. Allies, I just think the connectivity, and again, the ability to just call and scream at someone just helps diffuse that sort of underground fire that's in your chest that you can't stop on your own. You just can't do it. And that's when things are in, like, a terrible crisis. And regular day to day, it is so helpful to be able to call somebody up and be like, what do you think? And sometimes they'll tell you something that you're not going to do anything with, or you disagree with that, right? Like, ultimately you're not going to follow. But having that connectivity and those allies, and this is everywhere. I mean, we know in life and work and all that. I don't think we can overstate the importance of building allies on multiple levels, like personal love allies and friends and loved ones, and also professional allies who you can call and say, I don't really know what to do about this. And I find that the good part about that is all those people who I was honest with, I can call them now and I don't have to remember what I told them or pose anymore, right? I can talk about anything. And so the trust, I think, kind of works both ways there.
Thank you, Jennifer. Yeah, I mean, two things, we'll wrap up. Two things, I think, just to follow up with what the really important thing that Jennifer's saying is, it sounds like y'all really put a stake in the ground around your purpose. And that's the thing that kept y'all going, you were able to motivate your staff around, this is our why. This is why we're doing this. And for-profits do it too. The best for-profits have a strong sense of why. Beyond making a profit, it's why are y'all in existence? What is it y'all are trying to do for the world? And when the going gets tough, it's really digging into that purpose. And the other thing I loved about allies, which sounds like you had, was the two good qualities of your best allies are they have your back, but they're honest with you. And sometimes they'll have to tell you, your best allies will sometimes tell you truths that you don't want to hear, but because they have your back, they'll tell you things you don't necessarily want to hear, but you need to hear.
Right.
So those are the best allies to have.
Yeah.
So thank you, Jennifer. Thank you so much, Jennifer.
Yeah,
I knew you would do an awesome job because the person who recommended you, I trust implicitly. So thank you, thank you, thank you. This has been wonderful. I know we're running over time, and I want to be